The Honourable Member for Port Moody, Coquitlam.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. It's an honour for me to rise in the House today as one of 338 federal lawmakers in Canada whose duty is to make good laws that will have a positive impact on the lives of Canadians now and for generations to come. The weight of my duties as an MP have become more so evident as I've been serving my constituents through the pandemic. Canadians have been struggling intensely for 9 months as a microscopic organism called the coronavirus has caused us to shut down our lives and institutions on so many levels. Today, as I speak on Bill C-7, an act to amend the Criminal Code and medical assistance in dying, the weight of my parliamentary role is compounded because what I speak today may be the most important thing I've ever spoken during the 12 months I've been an MP. Today, I'm compelled to speak from the depths of my heart, conscience, and love for my fellow humans, and nothing less, because the very flow of life and death in our nation are in my hands and the hands of each member of this House through Bill C-7. Bill C-7 came about after the Quebec Superior Court struck down the reasonably foreseeable natural death clause of this legislation and as unconstitutional. This ruling resulted from a case of two individuals with degenerative diseases, Truchon and Gladue, who had sought to repeal this provision in the law and access MAiD. The judge asserted what the plaintiffs are really looking for is that the law recognizes equally the suffering, the dignity, and ultimately autonomy of people who, like them, are affected by serious and irremediable health problems without any hierarchy whether death is near or not. Bill C-7 eliminates the clause that requires a 10-day waiting period between when MAiD is requested and when it can be administered when death is reasonably foreseeable. Bill C-14, the original MAiD bill that was given royal assent on June 17, 2016, already allowed for this period to be waived under specific circumstances if two medical practitioners are both of the opinion that the person's death or the loss of their capacity to provide informed consent is imminent. Any shorter period that the first medical practitioner or nurse practitioner considers appropriate in the circumstances. Madam Speaker, many lawyers, doctors, families, and advocates for individuals with disabilities feel Bill C-7 has gone beyond what the ruling in the Truchon Gladue cases called for. They feel Bill C-7 is discriminatory to the disabled and risks the abuse of MAiD. According to Amy Hasbrook, a representative from the group Not Dead Yet, she says about the court ruling in a press interview, basically, this decision is saying that as far as society is concerned, it's better to be dead than disabled. Hasbrook feels governments should improve services for people with severe disabilities to help improve their quality of life and continue living in their own homes. This bill has also raised the concern of deepened challenges on the conscience rights of doctors. There are limited protections for the conscience rights of medical professionals already, and loosened restrictions will cause greater strife to those already uncomfortable with MAiD. Throughout the debates, this bill has raised a lot of concern that as Bill C-7 expands MAiD accessibility, it risks that palliative care will suffer, and as a result, patients will view MAiD as a better option, unless there is more focus on improving and expanding palliative care so that palliative care is more accessible. MAiD may appear to be the more practical solution for Canadians. Madam Speaker, I now speak on Bill C-7 as a potential trigger to another pandemic within a pandemic. Canadians are currently experiencing multiple pandemics within the pandemic. They're struggling with depression and anxiety about their future because of economic uncertainties and collapse. They're facing social isolation. Although uncertain about the full ramifications of the coronavirus, in order to prioritize and protect the health and safety of Canadians, multiple tiers of government across our nation opted to take drastic measures throughout the pandemic with lockdowns and travel restrictions that have infringed on some civil rights. Social isolation is putting seniors in a mental health crisis. Recently, Nancy Russell, a 90-year-old woman living in a senior home, chose MAiD because she didn't want to go through another lockdown or isolation this winter. According to some MAiD practitioners, there's a trend of more reports of seniors interested in MAiD and accelerating their timelines because of COVID. I'd like to ask each member in the House, is the timing of passing Bill C-7 with its safeguards removed during a pandemic where Canadians are vulnerable to depression and suicide a responsible action? The government had the option to appeal this, but chose not to. I fully appreciate that the debate on Bill C-7 brings issues of compassion, dignified death and suffering, and personal rights into a complex but profound discourse. Medically assisted death is complex. Debates on human rights are important. But in this time of severe, drastic measures to protect lives and keep Canadians safe from a virus that has the potential to take many lives, the government has entered an emergency mode and put health and safety above many important things. We've allowed the economy to fall apart to flatten the curve and save lives. Canadians put a precedent on saving lives over some basic rights. And rights don't exist in a vacuum. They exist to support the overarching vision and mandate which I hope unifies all of us in the House, and that is to protect the life, sustenance, and flourishing of humans, to ensure all people, regardless of who they are, their behavior, ideology, or capacity to be functional in life, that their existence and sustenance needs to be protected and individuals are given fair opportunities to dream and make the most of their lives. I understand the principles of debate and rights, but in the context of this pandemic we face, my humanity, my heart burns like a mother bear for the lives of Canadians. In a recent report from the Canadian Mental Health Association, 3,800 Canadians died after being admitted into hospitals for self-harm in 2018 to 19. With the stress, hopelessness, and trauma created by the pandemic, that number is on the rise, especially against the most vulnerable. In a survey held by CMHA in May during lockdowns, 38% of the people surveyed said that their mental health has declined due to COVID-19. 6% have had suicidal thoughts. 2% have tried to harm themselves in response to COVID-19. And based on this survey, if there are 30 million adult Canadians, then that would mean 1.8 million adult Canadians have had suicidal thoughts and 600,000 have tried to harm themselves as a result of the challenges caused by the pandemic. The count for the number of Canadians who've died from COVID-19 is 12,211 from yesterday's numbers. If only 6% of the 3,000 Canadians who participated in the survey had suicidal thoughts, that would still be 180 people. What does that translate to with Canada's entire population? More survey results show not everyone is affected equally. While 6% of the general population have suicidal thoughts since the outbreak of COVID-19, suicidal contemplation has been happening with 18% of people already struggling with their mental health, 15% of people with a disability, 14% of people with low incomes, and 16% of people who are Indigenous. This is not fair. Now, the question I'd like to ask all of us is, do we as members take mental health seriously? Do we recognize that extraordinary suicide prevention must be part of our COVID response? Do we see the danger of passing a bill like C-7 in context of a pandemic where we see rising numbers of mental health challenges and suicidal contemplation? The mental health side of the pandemic doesn't end with a vaccine because healing from trauma and financial restoration take time. What is the message we want to send to the Canadian public right now as parliamentarians? In the name of saving lives, we've allowed families to be separated. We've allowed businesses and institutions to be pulverized. But what support are we providing to counter the depression and hopelessness that comes from these drastic measures? We should be more focused on creating more access to counseling and mental health support. And for those who would say that mental health is a provincial issue, I would say mental health is a serious issue and one that all tiers of government must come to the table to discuss and implement solutions for. We have a responsibility as lawmakers to look at the big picture and understand the time we're in right now. We don't see suicides reported, but all of us know someone or someone directly or someone by 1 or 2 degrees of separation who have attempted suicide or committed suicide. Let's be sober. This bill can open doors to a suicide pandemic during this pandemic. Our duty is to pass legislation that protects the life, sustenance, and flourishing of our fellow humans, not make them more vulnerable and susceptible to death. Canadians need hope. Will my colleagues with a clear conscience be able to say, I did everything I could to prevent suicide? Will they be able to say with conviction, I helped someone find hope and not have to resort to death? I want to be wrong. I hope there is no suicide pandemic that the unpredictable waves and lockdowns of COVID-19 can exacerbate, but the government has chosen to put priority over saving lives at a high cost. Were the drastic measures reasonable or too severe? I think most Canadians would say that saving lives was worth it. So will it be worth saving lives by stopping the spread of a culture of suicide through a bill like C-7 during this pandemic? The very life breath of Canadians are in our hands right now. I cannot support this bill in the name of mental health and saving lives in this pandemic. I don't want blood on my hands for the death of any Canadians who were inspired by the passing of Bill C-7 to cope with mental health challenges and hopelessness during the pandemic, especially when we don't have enough to give them more hope. Being a parliamentarian comes with responsibility. Ideology comes with responsibility. Legislation comes with responsibility. Legislation is not separate from the current plight Canadians face. I encourage every member to examine this bill, recognizing there is not enough hope to safeguard the dangers of Bill C-7. Thank you.
Questions and comments?